So walk me down memory lane, how you got started. Let's clear our palates that way.
Yeah, it was, you know, I've been running this thing on LinkedIn for a while called TPRM Tidbits because in many circles, it's still very new to a lot of organizations, exactly what third party risk is. And then, you happen to reach out to me through LinkedIn and wanted to learn a bit more about that and, what I'm seeing out there. And we've had that conversation and it drove us to have what we're doing right now. So really, it's third party risk can go in so many different avenues,
But
but
did you before we got started into that, did like growing up, did you say, "Hey, I'm going to grow up to become a third party risk professional"?
oh no. If I was to tell you what I wanted to be growing up,
Yeah, tell me.
I
That's the
just
whole point.
believe it or not, when I was young, I live in Pittsburgh, grew up with Catholic parents, and went to Catholic school, and I wanted to be a priest. But I've always said to myself, when the bishop comes up to ordain me, he's going to go, "You? No, 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 no." Figured that was going to happen, so I kind of went down a different path. I originally started when I went to college. My focus was on finance, business, all that stuff. And I kind of back wheeled into technology. I did a lot on I was working for one of the large banks here in Pittsburgh. And I moved into their telecommunications group and I was helping with, I mean, these are simple technologies, but back then, things like the audio bridging systems and things of that nature, I was doing a lot of work on. And, and things billing, and then I moved on to the technical sides, went into the help desk arena where help desk actually were helping you and not just handing you a ticket. So I would have to restart platforms and help our the back office systems with their deck back systems or their tandem systems, the platforms. So it was fun, and then I shifted into audit, and then I moved into audit and IT audit. And that's where my career really started to bloom. I've been able to go down that path, learning about a lot of technologies, but also learning in the same process of what the business is doing and how they're utilizing technologies. And, from an audit perspective, there's so much emphasis on, documenting the controls and what they're doing now. And what are they doing with respect to, are the controls operating as intended? And making sure they have their documentation. So whenever a financial regulator was to come in or, the external auditors were able to deliver that documentation and show them our analysis. So much of this is going on. But, then from there, I went to the Big Four, did some work at the Big Four. And ultimately, I became the global IT audit manager for a large manufacturing firm. And if you want to see who they all are, you could simply go on LinkedIn, obviously, and go through that. But ultimately, I moved into the healthcare space. And in the healthcare space, I was doing a lot of IT controls, Sarbanes-Oxley testing, things of that nature. And then this thing came up within the organization that they said, we need a vendor assessment program. And nobody knew what it was. This was one of the regulators came in and said, you need to start doing this. And I was actually in security and at the time, and it was a blessing to me because I'm sitting there going, nobody wanted to do this, knew how to do it. I said, this is stuff I used to do in audit. I'm just doing IT general controls assessments, for vendors, you know. And if we needed to do a deeper dive, I could certainly bring any of our security staff in to assist on that. And so it took off, and I had the opportunity to hire people. I hired external firms to come in and assist us with staff augmentation and things like that. I worked with the compliance team to help develop the standards and policies, procedures, etc. And within a span of 5 years, our external auditors came in and said, you have developed a world-class vendor assessment program. And I've often said that, yeah, that's great and it sounds great, but I did not do it by myself. I was able to leverage and build on a lot of strategic partnerships. And, it's organizations with IT security, it was organizations such as facilities management, procurement, the business continuity folks, the IT operations folks, and working with the actual business units themselves, letting them understand what the service level agreements are, what our deliverables are to them, what we cover as a due diligence perspective. We're not going in and doing this real deep, detailed audit. There's a reason why we're doing this due diligence is if something goes wrong at a particular vendor, let's say it's a breach or some other type of thing, we can only cover so much. Think of it this way, David, when you're doing that kind of due diligence, let's say you're looking at an investment, you're looking at a stock, you want to purchase a stock. You're not going to get on the phone and call the CFO and ask him to start taking you through all the various types of return on investments and equity and all that stuff. He's going to go, unless you have $1 billion mutual fund that you're running, no, I'm not going to waste my time. And so what we do is we're able to show, we have done proper due diligence and we are okay with the overall security and privacy posture at a particular organization. And that's the value we bring to the business unit, knowing that they slept better at night. They can sleep better at night, knowing that they have experienced security, privacy, audit professionals that is able to do this and be able to go, I'm pretty confident with what they have here that we can hand them X amount of records, specific types of data based on the scope of work. So I tried to take all of that information and compress it into about a 6-7 minute conversation. So,
no, that's fantastic.
Or diatribe, since it was mostly me.
No, that's perfect. So tell me, so it sounds almost like that you were the right time, the right place, and the background in audit made you the perfect candidate to kind of build that program. And you also mentioned specifically that what triggered that was a regulator that came in to basically, demand some oversight on the third party. Do you feel that potentially all of it could have been handled by the auditors? Why do you think it was a whole program needed to be built? Isn't it just almost redundancy? There's already internal audit. Why not turn the internal audit around and say, okay, well, now you just have to audit the supply chain as well?
No, that's a good point. Focus on your word there, internal. Okay. What internal audit's focus is, by charter, is looking at the internal controls from a totally separate set of eyes for the organization. So internal audit has only one direct report, and that's the board of directors. A lot of people think they report to the CEO. No, they report up to the board of directors. So what they ask is, because when you look at third-party risk, we're looking at things through the risk lens. We're not looking at things through the security lens or the availability lens or any of those things. What is the risk to the organization operationally, based on processes, based on location, based on the data? We viewed everything through the data, because you're looking at not just employee data, but certainly customer information. You're dealing with credit cards, you're dealing with health information, other types of sensitive PII. So everything that we've done was through the lens of data. There's other organizations that may be looking through the lens of, what the process is. You see this shift with respect to what organizations are doing from a pure supply chain and from a vendor network perspective. They are two different things. So in an organization like a healthcare organization or like a bank, when they're offshoring when they're offloading processing for IT systems, whether it's benefits processing, check processing, whatever the case may be, and they do that to an IT organization, that's part of your vendor network. When you are part of like a manufacturing firm, you're actually bringing a product to market and you're relying on other components, nuts, bolts, wires, other types of technology. That's your pure supply chain. And so when you're looking at your pure supply chain through that lens, your focus is on availability. When you're taking a look at through more of your vendor network, the focus is on availability, but with a lot more security. And I have scared a lot of people on the pure supply chain side, because when they're starting to see things like ransomware, geopolitical events, natural events such as floods, hurricanes, things like that, now they're sitting back and they're going, we never took this into perspective, particularly from the security perspective. I ran into the CISO of a manufacturer of candies, and he said, we have never looked at our vendors through the security lens. Everything we do is availability. What happens if there's a price hike on cocoa? What happens if there's a shortage in sugar? If there's a shortage in other types of things that we can't make certain candies with? What do we do? And now they're sitting there going, oh my God, I never thought about if a certain processor happens to get ransomware and it shuts down the facility.
And do you think that's because of ransomware? Ransomware was kind of the trigger to all of a sudden look at the risk a certain way,
I'm
and
going to say
before that,
yes. I
okay,
think it was. I think it scared a lot of people in the manufacturing side going, we're running all of these SCADA systems, and some of these SCADA systems have been around for decades. Why change it if it works? They're making updates and stuff like that. But the adage still applies in many manufacturing firms: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Keep running it. We could do certain upgrades to it, but just like anything, if a threat actor is familiar with a certain type of platform that they're using, they have ways to go in and be able to hijack those platforms or put something on the network that's going to enable that data to be exfiltrated or shut down. There's numerous things they can do.
right. And Tom, what I'd like to do is I'd like to make this an episode 0, meaning that we're going to start covering some topics, and we'll make this a kind of a primer where we based, the kind of the next episode, we dive into like different topics within the supply chain, because there's just so much associated when you can't cover everything in one episode. So let's start with like trivial questions, like, when people ask you what it is that you do today, and somebody does not come from from that space, what do you tell them you do?
Let me throw this at you. You might get a kick out of this, David. Are you a fan of the TV show Friends?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. People ask my wife, what does your husband do for a living? And she goes, she's like Chandler. I have no clue what he does. And then my 18-year-old walks up to me and goes, Mom, he's a third-party risk management subject matter expert. I'm like going, thank you. At least somebody knows what I do in this household. So that's the running gag that we have. But that's what I tell people. It's third-party risk management encompasses all of these lenses, like I told, that I mentioned before. The running gag is it's not just for security anymore. It's not just cyber anymore. And that's what you'd have to look through. In many cases, for the last decade plus, third-party risk management was always viewed through the cyber lens.
And if you had
emphasis on security.
if you had to explain that to a 10-year-old,
well, to explain it, it's basically saying, there's everywhere you go, there's risk, and what we try to do is we try to mitigate and minimize. It's always going to be there. Anybody who tells you we eliminate, then it's, just whatever, just go away from me.
yeah,
you're never going to eliminate the risk.
In my mind, I'll try to explain it something like this. When you go buy ice cream from the ice cream truck, they have to buy, let's say if they manufacture their own ice cream, so they have to buy the milk, you have to buy the sugar and so on, and they partner with others to provide them those ingredients.
Sure.
And as a third-party risk professional, you have to monitor. We have to figure out, these partners, if they're still going to be in business tomorrow, and assess whether you're always going to have that milk. You always have to have that sugar, because otherwise the ice cream truck is going to go out of business. So that's what I would say to a 10-year-old, at least.
You could do that, and you could also say things like this: if you really want to start diving deeper based on the scope of the assessment, how old is the milk that they're using? Where do they get their sugar? Was it ethically sourced? If that's a component or a requirement for your for what you want to do with respect to the ice cream, you could ask things like,
or in this case, it's going to be out of the scoop of the assessment.
Out of the scoop of the assessment. That's a good. I like that. That's being creative. I like that. Out of the scoop of the assessment. I'm going to use it in the future. Please don't trademark that.
Well, no, of course not. Especially when we're talking about ice cream as part of the supply chain.
Sure.
So, what makes a good third-party risk professional? You are a great contributor to the space, and you provide some tidbits and information for others in the space, right? And so it's part of your journey to give back and expand that knowledge. So fundamentally, what make a good third-party risk professional? What kind of fundamental of basis of knowledge do they need to have in frameworks, or knowledge of frameworks and so on, that makes them effective in what they do for a living?
You have to like to ask questions. There's a lot of, why are we doing this? Show me you're doing this. Who's doing this? And you have to be able to write. You have to be able to listen. I've often said that auditors have a tendency to make the best assessors, because the word audit is Latin for one who listens. And I said, you have to listen. And
That's so cool, Tom. I learned something new. I did
no,
not know that.
no, yep, audit, yeah, audience,
Very
people
cool.
are listening. And so, by doing that is you have to be inquisitive. You have to be able to document and tie back. But to be an effective third-party risk professional too, depending on the industry that you're in, you may need a stronger security background. You might need a stronger privacy background. You might need a specific expertise in things such as metallurgy, if you're dealing with certain components that come into certain materials, having that type of a background. So it really depends on what the organization is looking for in a third-party risk profession. But when you take a look at it in the aggregate, I'm going to say the dominance of people that move into third-party risk have a strong audit, security, and privacy background, because in some way, shape, or form, it's understanding the components with respect to security and privacy. Because in some way or shape or form, you're talking personal records are involved.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like it's good to have another multidisciplinary, knowledge on maybe industry specific, as you just mentioned. That also helps.
Correct. Yes. There are things that are transferable. I've been around the block enough, playing in the financial space, playing in the manufacturing space, playing in the healthcare space, that obviously the things that I've done over the years from a third-party risk perspective, I can move into any of those industries. The trick of that is what do we have from a regulatory perspective? What do we have with respect to an industry standards perspective? So if you're in the healthcare space and you're used to doing things in the healthcare space, that might not be easily transferable from an industry perspective into something like manufacturing, where you have certain, maybe you have to be in alignment with, say, if you're in the gas or electric business, what are the FERC standards or the NERC standards? Or if you move into banking, are you familiar with OCC guidance? Are you familiar with Federal Reserve requirements, or whatever the case may be? So you really have to be able to brush up and understand what the requirements are for third-party risk, for data exchange and things of that nature. So that's, it does require a lot of reading and staying on top of regulatory guidance, standards. There's a lot of organizations that might turn around and go, I am a NIST shop. I will only do business with suppliers that can follow me with respect to NIST. Well, guess what? If you have partners that are overseas, particularly in the UK, they thumb their nose at NIST. They have their guidance that they like to follow.
Right, because
So
NIST is very much a America centric, right?
correct.
Mm-hmm.
And it's guidance, right? It's not regulation. There are industries that are, particularly here in the US, that are looking to NIST becoming more of a regulation than a guidance. But that's a conversation for another day. But when you go outside US borders, a lot of organizations look through the ISO lens. So they're looking at ISO. Are you ISO compliant? 27000, 27705, whatever you're doing in the cloud, 27018. My God, I sound like Joe Friday from Dragnet here, quoting laws here. But yeah, it's staying on top of all of these things, and it's just things that you learn over the years and you pocket away.
And for those who are listening, who are other new grads or people from industry they're listening to this and say, I like to be like Tom. I like to potentially. It sounds like he's excited about this. Sounds like he really enjoys what he does, and he's really passionate about it. And you can tell from the way you speak. And I want that too. What is the journey for somebody like that to take to start somewhere and potentially get into a position where they either being employed by a company that needs that, or either by a vendor that needs that? what's the steps they need to take? What's the kind of the typical journey?
Sure. First, any kind of background you get is great. Whether it's a security background, I'm seeing a lot of people getting the security background. It's still the bedrock of third-party risk. It really is. And the way to sell that too is, look, ransomware is front and center of a lot of minds. Most importantly, business units and the board. That's front and center. What are we doing about ransomware? What are we doing about ransomware on our vendors? So having that security background is great to get your foot started. IT audit or any type of audit or compliance background is another thing. A lot of people don't necessarily move into audit or compliance unless they actually have a drive for, stepping and ticking and tying and things like that. But that's really good. Once you start going in, and I'm sure you're aware of this, it's not necessarily, I've seen some people that go, I want to be in a third-party risk. I want to go get my master's. I go, get your certifications. In our professions, and I'm sure the same way in security, your certs help elevate you because you're constantly staying on top of the certs. And it obviously in our industries, same with security, it brings that level of credibility to the forefront. So I actually teach 2 certifications in third-party risk. One's a certified third-party risk professional certification. The beauty of that certification, it helps you understand the components and the foundational pieces of what a third-party risk management program is, how you start one, how you maintain it and manage it, and how you work with all of the other stakeholders within the organization, understanding the dependencies, looking at contracts, understanding clauses that should be in contracts. So it really brings that set of eyes. And I also teach a certified third-party risk assessor, which is it's more focused on the security track, focusing much more on understanding like cloud environments and change control management and things like that. And if you're an assessor, what should you be looking for? So it's kind of like, and I don't want to necessarily compare it to the CISSP, but it's very good to be able to understand it. It brings that security knowledge into that with other knowledge of like business continuity and privacy elements and things like that. So those 2 certifications are really good for somebody that wants to get more into third-party risk, and it really helps to get you in the front door. Even if you don't have them, still having the security background is really one of the first things that leaps out at anybody. If I was to hire somebody and I see somebody that has an audit or security background, they're the first people that I'm going to look at.
And what's that door looks like that entry level position, for somebody like that? Is that like a third-party risk analyst? Is somebody who looks at policies? What does that look like? And then potentially just describe in a nutshell what it is that they do on a day-to-day basis. Like, what did they look like?
Sure. Third-party risk, and you mentioned third-party risk, an assessor is usually the term, a third-party risk assessor. I've seen third-party risk analysts, third-party risk auditors, even though it has the word auditor. It's 98% chance it's not in the audit department. They just threw that word on there.
They should be. We should ban that term for for third party risk, because that's really confusing, right? I think what you just
it is confusing. And one of the things that I even did when I ran the program, I did not even want to use, when we found findings, issues, observations, we used the terms contingent items. And I said the reason why I don't want to use those other ones is because they're so centric to audit, observations, issues, and findings. Contingent items also, if you really digest it and break up the words and then piece them back together, you're basically telling the business and you're basically telling the vendor, in order to maintain this relationship, the vendor it's contingent on them to address these items to a risk mitigation or to a risk tolerance, our targeted risk tolerance that we are okay with.
That's
but
so
audit
interesting.
is obviously a great sounding board to bounce those off.
And Tom, this is so interesting. And that's an industry term that is being accepted and used by the industry, or is it something that you think is the best use? Like, do people still use findings and audits and okay.
They do. This is still very much kind of like a Wild West right now, but it's slowly being reined in. I'd love to see contingent items be the overall accepted term, but at this term, people still use issues observations.
So Tom, it starts here. on this podcast.
There
This
we
is where
go.
we.
Maybe this will springboard it.
so somebody who starts as, let's say, a third party risk analyst or an auditor, if you don't like the term, what it is that they do every day, that they come to the office or virtually, they log on, they start monitoring or seeing results of questionnaires. What's the process look like? And then I'm assuming that there's a lot of interaction. This is what makes it exciting, right? So
Yeah,
it's not a standalone role. You interact with all groups within the business, right, as well as potentially the third party. So there's very much, you don't work in a silo. You always are interacting with others in the space, right?
that's correct. Usually what I do, and I'll just take you through when I ran the program,
Yep.
right? When I hired people to come in, their jobs were to perform assessments. So usually what it is when the business, it starts with the business unit, or it could start through procurement, whatever the chain is, however it's been developed. They let me know of the vendor relationship. And then I would turn and say, who is available to do this assessment? Or if there's a specific location, if I had people on the East Coast as opposed to the West Coast, and this is a business unit that's on the East Coast, I'll give it to one of those people. Okay. It makes no sense in assigning a 3-hour time difference for somebody to work. So I would follow that methodology. And then I would have somebody that goes, okay, you have assessed this business unit before. You have done risk assessments for this business unit before. But if it's a brand new person, I would start off either shadowing. I think shadowing is a great way, obviously, to be able to learn how things are done. But basically what they're doing is they're going to talk to the business unit and say, I understand this is the scope of work for this engagement that you're doing with the vendor. Whatever processing they're doing. Okay, how many records are we talking about? 10,000, 10 million. Big difference. What kind of records are they? Is it company confidential information? Is it financial information? Is it personally identifiable information? What are we talking? Basic white page information, first name, last name, street address, maybe IP address? Or are we talking social security numbers?
And Tom, this is also what's interesting about the role, and specifically, is that not two engagements are alike, right? You always have,
Correct.
right? So you have to, despite the fact that the actual process itself may be very well defined,
Mhm.
right, within the organization. The idea is that you have a lot of leeway to interpret and get whatever you need from that vendor, from that partner, and that can change depending on a lot of different things, a lot of variables. So
Absolutely.
so no day is like the same day as before, depending on what kind of interaction, and that makes the whole role pretty interesting, right?
Oh, absolutely. You could have a business unit with 10 different scopes of work, and each one's different. Each one has a different set of requirements, has a different set of uh, key risk indicators that you got to take a look at. I've had one of the classic ones that I sit there and say is I had a business unit came up to me and said, Tom, I really like this vendor and I want to bring them on board. And I said, well, what do you plan on doing with them? And he said, I want to give them 1 million records of this particular data. And I said, had they ever been through an assessment before? Do you have any idea what their controls look like? Have they, Tom, that to my knowledge, they don't even have a SOC 2 or they don't have anything like that. And I would sit there and say, okay, here's how I can help you. Here's the value I'm going to bring to you. If you just want to get them in our vendor inventory and have them do some work from you, start by giving them maybe 100,000 records, million records. Have it be low-based PII. As I mentioned, basic PII, low-based PII. And I said, because we have developed our scoping standards.
And by the way, PII, for those who are listening and not familiar,
personally identifiable information. Sorry, don't mean to just throw acronyms out there.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
People are looking at it, what the hell is PII? But sorry, you can edit that. And and one of the things that we did is I said, we could take them through that. And then if you want to give them protected health information, or you want to give them credit card information, we can let you know what we're going to be asking for and what we're going to be checking on. So I'm basically saying, I'm giving you the answers to the test. And what we did was we looked at them. Their controls were satisfactory based on that scope of work. Then the business unit came back and said, Tom, thank you so much. 6-7 months from now, I plan to give them credit card information. Now what they're doing is they're raising their security, particularly around they understand what they need to do from a PCI requirements phase. They're going to start rolling that out. Then we can do a reassessment on them. And so we've already have an understanding of their baseline controls. Now we can target for that scope of work. Do you have these controls that tie in for PCI guidance, or actually the PCI standard? And that's what we would assess them based on that. So then they got 2 scopes of work, particularly tying into that business unit with respect to that vendor. So, and it's fascinating. Like you mentioned, you're talking to the business, you're working with the vendors. And as you probably have figured out, I'm a people person. So that's the pleasure that I get of helping the business units, because when you partner with them and they reach out to you, and that's where people like me started to get seats in front of the CIO, in front of the chief privacy officer, in front of the CISO and all that, where they would call me and say, hey, Tom, can I talk to you about this? Sure. And then that helped to build my stature within the organization. So you can climb relatively quick within the organization by being involved with this stuff.
That's right. And then you get exposed to the business units, right?
Yes.
Sometimes at the highest level, depending on the engagement. And then it sounds like it's a satisfying journey, right? Because you kind of lead them by the hand, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel where things are done, which is really satisfying to see. Let's say a brand new vendor and business units come together and finally, tying the knot with your assistance. And so that also has to be satisfying, that you are were able to lead them to a successful journey. Now tell me, typically, so I'll give an example. In some organization, the security teams is not very much liked. They have this, sometimes conflict, not a conflict, but almost friction sometimes between, security and the business units, because they see them as a creating slowdown in processes, and nobody likes them and so on, because they kind of seems to come from above. What is the third party risk DNA in these organizations? Like, is there similar type of relationship, or is it different, or is it, because again, every entity within the organization has its own attributes, almost like, the audit guys who nobody like, tell me what's it like in a large enterprise.
I think we were very successful in shaping our message. And what we would do on a quarterly basis, we reported into the chief privacy officer, and the chief privacy officer would send out a quarterly reminder letting organizations know that if you're going to engage in a net new vendor, or when our GRC platform would send them a notification, a business unit, and saying, hey, look, we have a reassessment coming due, that they reach out to us and make sure that by policy, everything has to go through the vendor assessment program. So it's a constant reminder to them saying, hey, you have to go through this. It's funny, I'll bring this up because I still laugh at it to this day. The actual business units themselves were very good at doing this and building this into their project plan. IT, not so much. Can't tell you how many times let's take today. It's a Thursday. Somebody would call me up in IT and say, hey, Tom, how long does a vendor assessment take place? How long does it take to do a vendor assessment? And you're like, why?
Depends.
And they go, well, we're going to start transacting data on Monday. And I'm like, no, you're not. Because we have to do a vendor. Here's our SLA, and I would share the SLA. Our SLA was 30 days from the date of notification to by the time the report goes out the door. And we had a risk committee that had to review it, of C-level executives. And they go, what am I going to do? Your project management office knows this. Okay. And then I've always built things, and this is going to be an upcoming tidbit. So I'll share this with you. I'm breaking this to you. That what we did was we created a notification to the business unit VP saying, we are allowing you to transact data while the assessment goes on. But if we're not comfortable with that assessment, we reserve the right to pull the plug on the assessment and pull the plug on the engagement and you have to cease sending them any type of information. That's when the business unit VP picks up the phone and calls me and goes, what are you asking me to sign? And when I tell them that, that's usually when they bring the project management in and goes, how the heck did you not know this? Next time, build a 45-day or 60-day buffer into your project plan. And then it usually doesn't happen again. But organizations have a tendency to do that, particularly on the IT side. And you have to explain to them, once the horses are at the barn, legally, if we are sending data to a vendor and something happens and we haven't done the assessment, the regulators are going to hit us. The law firms are going to target us. They're not going to target the vendor because we have not done the assessment prior to allowing that data to go out. And if you happen to be, David, familiar with a lot of the financial and banking guidelines, here's something for your listeners that happen to be in that space. Even though it has been updated and it's been superseded by a new act, Appendix J of the FFIEC, the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council, released a great document called Appendix J, which talks about business resilience, why you need to do this up front, testing with your vendors. And this also goes back to a regulation called 2013-29 of the OCC, which basically says you need to do this prior to transacting data. So when you start looking at the relationship, you have to do the assessment, take it through the contract phase, and then continuous monitoring, and it's the big circle of life. I threw a lot at you. I know I did.
No. This is perfect. So tell me, the Chief Information Security Officer typically leverages the entire organization. So they had to create security awareness programs, or they send out a communication. And again, it takes a village to make that the whole moving parts of security to have everybody, in everybody's mindset, to make it more effective, more efficient, and frankly, just better for the entire organization. Does the chief third-party risk compliance, do they do the same? Do they communicate to the organization, like in terms of, as you mentioned, for example, what are the best practices when engaging with a partner? What things to look for in terms of project management? What are the pitfalls of engagement? All of that, is that something that routinely has been done within the enterprise, where again there's an engagement, there's a communication from the third-party risk department to the rest of the organization to make everybody more effective?
Well, what we tried to start to do, I should say, was do a roadshow and taking it to locations within the organization and having either the head of the department or a designated attendee from that department to represent them, to understand what a third-party risk management assessment is and why they have to go through the vendor assessment program. We used to use the term VAP. Why they have to be VAP'd. People used to use that as a verb there. And so it's taking them through not just what we do, but why we have to do it and the importance of it and how we want to partner with them. But in order to have that partnership work, we need transparency, we need honesty, we need them to be as forthcoming as can be, because I cannot tell you how many times, whether it was me or whether it was my staff, being on a conversation with the business unit, and they're sitting there going, Tom, we're only giving them basic PII. And I'm going, send me a copy of the data elements documentation. And then you start looking at it and you're going, okay, L name, last name, F name, first name, what's SS pound sign? Oh, social security numbers.
The devil's in the details.
That's it. And I've always said this, and I take this to the bank because it happens all the time. I said, if you really want to know what the business unit is sending to the vendor, ask the vendor, because they know what they're on the hook for. And I've been on calls with the vendors going, no, we're getting credit card information from you. And they go, really? And they said, yeah. And oh my God, I was out that day. I wasn't in the meeting. And that's what happens. Or I had you'll get a kick out of this. I had a situation where the legal counsel from a business unit called me up and said, hey, Tom, I just wanted to share, we're picking this one vendor to help us decide where we're going to put new stores in a certain geographic region. So with that being the case, it's more driven from marketing. I don't think we really need to go through a vendor assessment program. So I just wanted to bounce this off you. And I'm sitting there going, it's like your spider sense is tingling and you're going, okay, something here is not being shared with. And I said, I'll tell you what, why don't we just have a call with the vendor so I could better understand this? And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. So he set up a call. And I got to keep saying this. Remember, this is the attorney for the business unit. This is the legal counsel for the business unit. Sets up a call. So you have the legal counsel, you got the business unit, and you got the vendor. So the legal counsel starts talking about, Tom, hey, great to have you here. As a run through, here's what we're doing, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like going, and he goes, yeah, they're going to be using time-tested marketing techniques and strategy techniques to figure out where to put these stores. And I said, and I'm talking to the vendor on the phone.
Sounds great, by the way. What a great pitch.
It does. It does sound like a good pitch. And I said to the vendor, so are we handing you by chance any personally identifiable information? And this is where the collective jaws dropped, where they said, yeah, we're actually taking to see what health information, you might have, for instance, a certain need in this geographic area, but they're all purchasing all of this prescription drug information from here. So we're going to build a store here. And I'm just sitting there going, I knew it. And then you sit there and go, thank you, gentlemen. We'll start the assessment on Monday. And then the attorney comes, I never know. I'm like, you're an attorney. You should be asking these questions. But that's the value of third-party risk coming in and saying, I need more information. We need, my first position here is to protect the business unit, but to protect the organization. And if I turned a bad eye and just went, okay, don't worry about it, and something happened with that data, and we didn't take a look at the controls on how they were going to handle God knows how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of records of health information, it's going to come back on me. Where was the vendor assessment program? How did you miss this? So that's why you got to ask the right questions to make sure if somebody doesn't have to go through that program, then we sign off on it. And if so, we have them in the queue and we have them in our inventory.
And Tom, it sounds like it's in everyone's best interest to have all the ducks in a row in an engagement.
That's
because
true.
The vendor's best interest as well is to listen. At the end of the day, they want to do business. They want to make money.
Yeah.
They don't want to cause like some harm and cause financial damages and in consequences for handling, mishandling, communication or data or so on. So it's in their best interest as well to make sure that it does not happen.
Right.
For continuous relationship, also industry. This word travel fast, right? If you're a vendor, something happened with a service provider or whatever, something blew up like that, it's not good for your reputation. Most likely it will travel real quick and you're not going to be able to do business with anybody else. So it's in their best interest. It's actually everyone's best interest to make sure that doesn't happen. So do people aware that that's the case, or they just say, well, they just have a very short foresight and say, oh, we just want to have this transaction done and move on?
No, let me see if I could even put that. You might get a kick out of this. I cannot tell you in the infancy of the program when we were running it, how many vendors have called me and said, thank you for taking us through this. And these are more of the small, mid-sized vendors, not the big dogs like the IBMs, the Cognizants, etc. These are the smaller and mid-sized vendors. And they're going, thank you so very much for this, because we've never been through this before. And your team has really helped us to guide this. And I know this is not going to be the first, this is not going to be the last assessment. And so we actually prepare them from assessments from other clients.
Was that a tail that I just saw?
Yeah, my cat's getting ready to crash the camera right now. He just jumped up, and that's why I'm holding him back. And I swear to you, every time I do something like this, my cat has to make an appearance.
And also, the vendor. You touch upon a really good point, and then we'll wrap this up, because I have so much stuff that I think we just kind of cover the tip of the iceberg.
Sure.
So also the vendor, if if they show this level of maturity when talking to yet another customer, most likely again they can almost show this as a competitive advantage. Look, we are more mature. It's part of like our process to get all the ducks in a row from an engagement perspective as a partner. We are now much more, we're more secure. You can your data is safe with us. Um, and basically use that to promote business and promote the business and accelerate the business. Is that a
Yeah,
correct statement?
it is. And I'll tell you why too. It is a business differentiator to doing that because you're able to do on two fronts. On the first side, from an assessment perspective, by being able to do this, I think I've shared enough where you can say I'm protecting the business. But as a vendor, from the vendor lens, if I'm able to sit back and go, all right, we're going to be assessed. What do we need to make sure we have with respect to controls? It's documented. We're able to be transparent and share with our clients what we do. Too many organizations just go, here's my SOC 2 report. Thank you. When do you want to start? That's not enough. And I can't tell you how many times I have told organizations, you handing me a SOC 2 report or your ISO 27000 cert, that's great, but I'm still going to assess you. I still got to take you through the assessment.
And why is
And
that? It looks like, Tom, it looks like everybody's touting the SOC 2 as the be all and end all.
no, it's not, because you get to pick the controls. You get to pick of those five domains, which ones you want. You're going to have security, you're going to have privacy, but you might not say, I'm not going to opt for physical controls. You might say, I'm not going to opt for this particular process. So my cat is rubbing up against my laptop. I tried to toss him one time and he comes back. It's in the ball. Yeah, so, one of the things that a lot of organizations could do is by bringing a third-party risk professional on, is by having somebody internally saying, hey, I can handle those inbound requests, number one, but also I can work with the internal security and privacy and IT operations organizations to make sure that we have everything lined up and build and develop what I've used to use the term a compliance package. And I helped an organization actually do this by saying, develop a compliance package. Look at the critical components. What are you doing from an HR perspective? What are you doing from a security perspective? What are you doing from an application controls perspective? On and on and on. And say, get this. Let's put it either on a SharePoint server or let's put it on, into a binder, whatever you need to do from a documentation perspective. So when people reach out and they say, we want to do an assessment or an audit on you, you already have that lined up. And then I've known organizations, particularly this one, actually handed it off to organizations and said, go look at the due diligence that we've done. If there's any questions you have outside of what I'm sharing with you, because there might be something project specific, there might be something specific to a particular regulation that you're involved with. All right, just sit down. Then I'll entertain those questions. I will entertain those questions. But that's where a lot of value can come in by having somebody with a third-party risk management background, because they understand what it takes to go through an assessment. And I think that's so valuable to know.
So for those who are audio only, just so you know, Tom's cat is insisting in being part of this podcast, and any kind of background noise, we apologize. But he's
it's the cat. It's not you, David.
So, let me ask you this. And so many questions. I'm trying to keep my head straight here. So when vendors talk about security, a lot of them are required and also trying to do security by design, meaning they design a product and they have the security controls like as part of the development and so on, not towards the end of it, and just as a tag on. Would be safe to say that they should think about throughout the kind of the development process and in the kind of, because vendors are always like, it's a moving target, right? They're always trying to get better. Is it safe to say that they should probably look at the kind of third party engagement in the same way, where it's throughout development, throughout like, building the vendor relationship and so on, look at it as something that they have to integrate into their processes, so it's not as an afterthought?
Well, I wouldn't look at necessarily like security by design, like a third-party risk management design. Um, security by design, like you mentioned, you have, security at every stage of the development
That's
phase.
right.
Third-party risk, from that perspective, what we've often said was share with us what is the inherent risk? Legacy, we used to use the term exposure risk. What am I being exposed to that I don't know from this vendor? It's kind of like going on a first date. I need to know something about this individual. And somebody might say, oh, you're going to really like her. She's into this. She's into that. Okay, great. So I have an understanding of what I'm getting into. Yeah, I'm interested in this person. That's the inherent risk. Then if I was to start understanding that she's got a crazy uncle, she doesn't like this type of food, which I happen to love, or, if I'm looking at a long-term relationship here and she says, I don't want kids, but I do. Now I'm sitting there going, now I'm looking at risk. My tolerance for risk is going up, I'm sorry, my tolerance for that risk is going down because I'm starting to see all of these negatives.
Right.
So
And that's
tied
you
into
talk
me
about.
personally.
Yeah, and you talk about almost like a life cycle. So it's in a vendor relationship too, as you mentioned, you may start small, relatively speaking, small engagement with maybe limited data or limited risk, and that can very quickly escalate to a much more robust engagement, much more involvement.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah. What you can do with that, first off, is let's take a big dog like IBM. Okay. Everybody uses IBM, every large organization practically. IBM's probably doing upwards of 20 to 30 various scopes of work across the enterprise. But when you start taking a look at their enterprise controls, they're pretty much the same. They follow certain security by design. They have security across the board with respect to their network controls. Regardless of where the processing is being done, they have security standards. They have change management standards. But what happens if the processing is being done at a facility that's brand new? How do I know what the physical controls are there? I need to see them. So this is where a value like a SOC 2 can come in. And if they don't have one, this has happened a lot of times. I used to joke around with the IT folks. I'm like, you have all of these scopes of work now across 6 different IBM locations. Can't you just pick 2 or 3 so I wouldn't have to keep sending people there, or you don't have to turn around and go, because oh, Tom, we got a SOC 2 for that. Then they send me the SOC 2 and I'm like going, it's not in here. Oh, I do read these things, by the way, because, the account executive's like, oh, I got a SOC 2 for that. And then you're going, it's not in here. Where's the app?
What's the reaction, Tom? I can't see, I can't imagine the account, the account manager.
Happens
Like,
all the time. And then I have to send one of my staff to do a physical controls assessment.
They like go like busted.
Yep.
Well, they obviously didn't read it, so I don't think they do that on purpose.
No, and I say this, and I say this openly. Many organizations tend to use SOC 2s as marketing documentation. Oh, look, we got great controls. Here's our SOC 2 report. Thank you. I will review it. I will look and note the management responses in it. But guess what? I'm still going to assess you. And here's why. Because the scope of this work has certain needs. And I got to make sure that the needs of the business unit are being met, not the general ones that the external auditor came in to look at. And by the way, I need to see how many of these that you are actually, oh, no, we're not going to cover that in this, because every time you add something on, it adds to the cost of the SOC 2. And not every organization, particularly smaller and mid-sized organizations, got the coin to put out a SOC 2 report annually. So they might, my tolerance was every 2 years. So if you gave me a SOC from 2019, I'm going to throw it out. If you gave me a SOC from 2021, okay, I can, as long as it's before May, what is this? My eyes are going. May 18th, I'm fine. I can look at it because an assessment, like an audit, is a point in time. But, you know, and you're making a lot of cases to a lot of, and you need to have good judgment. You have to have good judgment. Good technical skills are good, good understanding of rules and regulations. But you also, and you know this, judgment is something that you hone on, and it's part of your craft as you mature in your professional career.
You almost develop like common sense, like almost like
Yeah.
almost like another like a third party risk brain, where it's separate from it. It's almost like a sixth sense, but in the sense that you've from experience you've kind of know where the gray area, because it seems like there's a lot of room for judgment, like from individual perspective, and meaning that you can interpret certain information and data many different ways, but it comes down to your experience as a third party risk professional to
Right.
make the determination in terms of whether it should continue and move on, or we have to push back. Listen, Tom, we coming to the top of the hour. I'd like to wrap this up, and we have so many topics to cover. We'll do a couple more episodes. We have, I think we just got started. What's the easiest way for people to reach out to you and then plug in your podcast, the tidbits that you provide, and then we'll wrap this up.
Well, thank you so much, David. Yeah, if anybody would like to, I always said I have an open door policy. I mean that not just internally, but whether it's the people that I've taught over the years or anybody, I said, just reach out to me. Be more than happy to have this conversation, because it's a way that I like to give back to the community. So if anybody wants to either connect with me on LinkedIn, Tom Garrubba, or you could reach out to Tom, Garrubba, my last name, at echeloncyber.com. Be more than happy to follow up with you. Let's get something on the calendar. And, if you sit there and say, it's like Lucy and Peanuts, the doctor is in, and if you want to be Charlie Brown and sit down and just, hey, Tom, can I bounce this idea off you? I'm more than happy to do that, because we all work together in this. We all help each other out. And that's really what it's all about. It's all about the continuous learning experience.
100%. And we will as well do a live session with like AMA, Ask Me Anything. I'm going to schedule that in advance and maybe come up with some questions, because again, I'm sure people have, some questions they'd like Tom to answer, and from their own experiences, maybe there are some challenges they're facing right now in their own business and companies. Both from the vendors and the enterprise side. I think, again, we're all working together to accelerate business. That's the underlying reasoning for all of this.
Perfect. Yeah.
So until then, stay safe online as well as offline, and I'll see you at the next episode. Thank you very much,
Thanks
Tom.
so much, David. Take care.
Take care.